Dear friends, I would invite you to take your seats. It is my pleasure to welcome His Eminence Mariano Crociata. He's bishop in the south of Rome. He's coming from Italy. And since March, I guess, or March, you are elected as the new president of Comice. In my report, I spoke several times about the close collaboration between CEC and Comice in Brussels, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the General Assembly of the Conference of European Churches, and I would like to come on the stage and to say a few words of greeting to our assembly.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My most cordial greetings to all participants in this General Assembly of the Conference of European Churches, so meaningful in its composition and for the circumstances in which it's taken place. I especially greet the outgoing President, Christian Krieger, and offer my best wishes, united in prayer, to the incoming President. I am grateful and honored for the invitation to participate and speak to you all. The commitment of Comice has been fortified in the past years by a consolidated experience of collaboration and a mutual understanding with CEC. Today, I am here to express my wish to renew and continue this cooperation with ever more conviction and dedication. The presence of our churches in the EU member states is first and foremost a calling of history, of our common history of these last decades and of today. As Christians, we feel called to make our contribution to a union that can truly constitute, according to the intentions of its founding fathers, a unique possibility of development for its peoples and a promise of peace for all of us and for the world. Unfortunately, it is precisely the aspiration for peace that has been most challenged for almost a year and a half, now with the war in Ukraine. With no sign of an end, despite the attempts and efforts being made from various sides to ensure that the war is stopped, first and foremost by those who unjustifiably started it. Our common prayer is unceasing, but we are also deeply saddened by the awareness that the unity of the churches should anticipate and represent the united soul of the peoples of Europe. Instead, our internal divisions end up fueling lacerations and misunderstandings. More than ever, the awareness of our sins and the call for mercy and conversion become more urgent, as does the need for an authentic ecumenism. Therefore, we would like to witness an ever stronger will for communion and growing efforts to find common understandings and projects to overcome conflict and create ways of reconciliation and peace. We are sure that such aim, which constitutes the yearning of your assembly, touches the heart of God and can obtain from Him the gift that the hearts of all of us and all of those involved in dialogue with you is transformed, so that God's plans for peace become ours too. In this way, your wish and commitment to shape the future with God's blessing can become a reality. Thank you very much.
And before I leave the word to this wonderful panel, showing the youth committed to the church life and to KEK, I call on the stage Jonas just to give a short introduction to the theme. Jonas.
Thank you very much. On your tables you will find a fact sheet entitled Pathways to Peace. It's a short description of the KEK coordinated response to a call for action in the light of the ongoing war in Ukraine. The aim of this project is to maximize the effect of European churches' response to the Ukraine war through synergy in participating churches under the leadership of KEK. On the PowerPoint, you can see 3 objectives in this project: mapping church leaders, intellectuals, and academics in preparation for peace in Ukraine. Secondly, advocacy for protection of destroyed, damaged, or looted religious sites in Ukraine. And thirdly, enhancing the ecumenical vision for just peace. Now, why am I standing here? I'm standing here because I've been involved with this project. I'm not from Ukraine, but I'm from Denmark. But this is a project open to all KEK members, and we hope that you will engage yourself in this. To allow your reflection and input to the project, we invite for a World Cafe process at 6:30 this evening in what is called the small hall. 6:30 this evening in the small hall. There will be presentations of each of these objectives and a discussion facilitated on the project. So I kindly invited you to engage yourself in the project. Thank you very much.
So, thank you. And Your Eminences, dear bishops and pastors of the Church, dear sisters and brothers in Christ, this is the second hearing about the war in Ukraine on this assembly, and it's called The Role of Churches in Transforming Violence. I just want to present all the participants of our 2 parts. This is Dr. Andrei Smirnov, Ukrainian historian, Mrs. Yulia Kominko, a famous Orthodox journalist in Ukraine, Ksenia Egert, a specialist in canon law, Natalia Vasilevich, a theologian and a political activist from Belarus, Alexandra Kovalenko from the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, Bogdan Mostovi from the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Alisa Yachenko, she represents Ukrainian Baptists, and Reverend Alexander Kuchta, an Orthodox priest from Belarus, and a famous Orthodox blogger in Russian language. So, we begin with the short introduction, and I have a question to all the speakers. First of all, represent yourself, please, and then ask me, please, on the question, where are you based now, and how did the war affect you personally? Well.
Thank you. My name is Andrei Smirnov, and I am professor at the Department of History of the National University of Ostrog Academy based in Western Ukraine. Also, I am a member of the Synodal Commission for Inter-Christian Relations of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine and a participant of the informal interchurch dialogue of the clergy and laity of 2 Orthodox churches. After Russian military aggression against Ukraine, I continued to teach my students and started my volunteer work to help Ukrainian army and internally displaced persons. A lot of my friends, colleagues, and even students joined armed forces. Unfortunately, many of them were killed in the war. Russia's massive shelling has caused the largest blackouts last winter, and we adopted to the blackout schedules and even used it to continue classes within bomb shelters in case of air raid alerts. We demonstrate to the world that there are principles worth living and even dying for dignity, truth, and freedom.
Thank you. My name is Yulia Kominko. I'm a journalist from Kyiv, Ukraine. I'm working in media of Ukrainian Orthodox Church from my graduation, the university. You know, before the full-scale war in my country, I worked at the Orthodox Youth magazine. Our last issue was dedicated to the future of the world and was published the day before the war. And the last words at the last page was about Prophet Jonah, that God doesn't want to kill the citizens of Nineveh. So, and about our Ukraine, I hope that the war will not destroy my country, but God will reveal His glory in our resistance and victory.
Hello, my name is Ksenia Egert. I study canon law and society law and religion in Catholic University of Leuven, and I was an intern for KEK. At this time, right now, I'm based in Lithuania, and I work Russian language media to counter the Russian propaganda. Is that working? Originally, I'm from Russia, but would say, am I doing something wrong? Sorry. I would just say, as a Russian, I cannot speak too much of my experiences. I'm privileged to be here, to be alive, to have my family safe. As many people, I have Ukrainian friends, Ukrainian colleagues. So I just wish for this war to end in Ukraine's victory. Thank you.
My name is Natalia Vasilevich. I'm Orthodox theologian, and now I'm based in Germany, in Bonn, where I'm preparing my doctoral thesis on the mission of the Orthodox Church in today's world. But since the start of war in Ukraine, or better to say, since the start of political crisis in Belarus in 2020, I have to do a lot of mission and to promote mission of the Church in today's world, not in my thesis, not in academic work, but in reality, in everyday life. Since the beginning of political crisis in Belarus, Christians were united in a movement for democratic transformations and for peace and justice called Christian Vision, and we were very much concerned about our own country. But on 21st of February 2022, our life changed. We understood that there will be no freedom in Belarus, there will be no democracy in Belarus, and there will be no justice in Belarus if the war in Ukraine will continue, if the Russian aggression will succeed, if Ukraine will be occupied. And for us it was very important also to bear responsibility for the actions of Belarusian regime to provide our country for attack against Ukraine. So we try always to, first of all, our first sight is on Ukraine, and then via Ukraine, only via Ukraine, and the situation in Ukraine, we can see our own country and our all democratic movement.
My name is Alexandra Kovalenko. I'm a researcher of religious studies and also a member of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. I'm currently based in Kyiv. Being a Ukrainian, of course, war has affected me in many ways, but first of all, it's an experience of being internally and externally displaced person, and then for the past year living in the capital of the country at war through the power outrages, blackouts, and missile attacks.
Hello Ksenia, hello everyone. My name is Bogdan Mostovy, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Before the war started, I had been doing my studies at the Kyiv Theological Academy, and at the Bosse Ecumenical Institute. In the year of 2020, I finished both these institutions. And my main topic and my main interest was neo-patristic theology. At the moment, I'm doing my studies in Germany at the University of Heidelberg, and my interest changed a little bit, and now it's the idea of pacifism and ecumenical movement after the war in Ukraine. So I believe that there are many things we can research. Answering the question how the war influenced me, I believe that the most important aspect how it influenced me and all Ukrainians is the fact that we are united as never, and we are ready to do something in order to finish this war and in order to liberate our country. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Alice Heichenko and I'm from Odessa. I was born there and lived there all my life. Also, I finished my baccalaureate degree in psychology there in Mechnikov University of Odessa, and also I'm a member of Baptist Church in Odessa. Answering the question how the war affected me, me and my family moved to Transcarpathia, and we were living there for 7 months, and just after that we returned to Odessa as a family. I felt maybe a psychological trauma from that, and in Odessa, because it's close to the war zone, we faced with massive missile attacks, a blackout, destruction of our infrastructure. The war also affected my church ministries because almost all members of my worship group, I'm a leader of worship group in my church, and youth team moved to different countries, so my ministries simply ceased to exist. And I'm so thankful to be here and to share my own experience with you. It's very important for me. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Alexander Kukhta. I am an Orthodox priest from Belarus, and as Ksenia says, I am owner of the biggest YouTube channel about Christianity in Russian and Belarusian languages. And in 2020, after the elections in my country, I participated in many events that took place in Belarus. For example, I stood as a live shield between peoples and police. I conducted memorial services for those people who were killed by Belarus police, and I was a volunteer. And because of this, I had to flee my country, and I moved to Ukraine. And after the war started, I moved to Lithuania. But for a long time, I was a volunteer on the border between Poland and Ukraine. But now I'm living in Lithuania. And 2 months ago, I transferred from Moscow Patriarchate to ecumenical Patriarchate, and now I'm working with Belarusian people all over the world, inside and outside of their country.
I'll briefly share my own experience because I'm from Russia. I was born in Moscow and spent all my life there. I had to leave Moscow after the invasion broke up on the 24th of February of 2022. as all Russian independent journalists did, because all Russian independent media were closed in a week after the war began. And we have this new immigration wave from Russia, and it's really also a hard experience. I'm not comparing, of course, with the Ukrainians, but because in Russia, everybody who stays there, and who doesn't support the war, they are in danger. We have a lot of political prisoners now. The most famous of them are Ilya Yashin and Vladimir Kara-Murza, and the journalist Ivan Safronov, and there are others. An artist, Evgenia Berkovich, was arrested a month ago, and she is in the prison, but she has 2 young children, and it's really a tragedy to stay in Russia and to be against the war and against Putin. So I left. I am not so brave to stay and to fight. I've written for for 20 years, even more, about the Russian Orthodox Church as a journalist and as a researcher. And now I continue to write, these chronicles of the hell, how Patriarch Kirill and his bishops and his priests support the war and bless this war and this disaster and the killers, and how they punish all the priests who say out loud that they are against the war and they are for peace. So I think that the tragedy of Russian anti-war movement should be also mentioned. That is my point. And now I give the word to our speakers, and first is Andrei Smirnov.
Glory to Jesus Christ, dear brothers and sisters. I would like to speak about the war in Ukraine as a challenge for Orthodox community. Russia's genocidal war against Ukraine presents challenges for Ukrainian government, the military, diplomacy, medical services, charities, and universities. Russia's destruction of the Novakakhovka Dam in southern Ukraine has caused a humanitarian and ecological catastrophe. In a globalized world, the full-scale invasion represents a problem that reaches far beyond Ukraine. It is also a test for the churches who attempt to help, encourage, and assist the millions of refugees and victims of this war. The sustainable and inclusive peace would involve not only the full restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity, but also measures which aim to create an international tribunal that would prosecute the Russian authorities, to establish a specific Ukraine's transitional justice mechanism for criminal cases on the territory of Ukraine, as well to restore relationships both within Ukrainian society and at the global level. How can we achieve sustainable peace? I suppose it should include, but not limited to, the truth-telling and acknowledgement, criminal courts, reparations, political apologies, and forgiveness. This is what we fight for, not just for a victory in this war, but for true, sustainable peace. The Russian aggression against Ukraine directly affected Ukrainian religious communities. Thousands of Ukrainian citizens, members of churches, have been murdered or forced to leave their homes. Above 500 sacred sites in Ukraine have been destroyed during the full-scale war. The Ukrainian churches have shown an unseen unity in condemning Russia's aggression since the very first day of the war. The All-Ukrainian Council of Churches, which unites 16 churches and religious organizations, including Jews and Muslims, issued a statement with words of support for the Ukrainian armed forces and a blessing to the soldiers, asking the international community to help stop Russia's invasion. Metropolitan Epifani Dumenko, the primate of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which obtained autocephaly in 2019, called upon all people of goodwill to pray for peace, but also highlighted the duty of citizens to protect Ukraine. More than 100 priests of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine performed chaplaincy activities in the armed forces of Ukraine. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church affiliated with the Moscow Patriarchate was also very sharp in condemning the Russian invasion. Metropolitan Onufry Berezovsky called the invasion a repetition of Cain's sin. Such a war has no justification for either God or man, he said. The Russian Orthodox Church now openly justifies Russia's aggression against Ukraine and blesses Putin's troops. The Russian world doctrine became a political instrument of the Kremlin, an instrument of military aggression. Both Russia's invasion and its justification by the Russian Orthodox Church represents a major challenge for the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The Moscow Patriarchate has been a part of the Russian World Project, promoting the narratives of common Russian people and anti-Westernism. Attempts by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church to assure Ukrainian civil society and the government of its absolute independence from the Russian influence were not particularly successful, and calls to ban the Ukrainian Orthodox Church became more pronounced. After several cases of clergy collaboration with Russia emerged, the government ordered searches in church properties, terminated the lease of the Kyiv-Pechersk Lavra, imposed sanctions against church officials, opened above 60 criminal cases against the clergy, putting several bishops under house arrest, and perhaps most importantly, drafting a law proposal prohibiting religious organizations with an affiliation in Russia. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church has decided to anticipate this course of action by making itself more independent from the Russian Orthodox Church. However, Ukrainian government commission concluded that the new redaction of the church statute did not lead to a substantive modification of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church status vis-à-vis the Russian Orthodox Church, and therefore it continues to be subordinate to the Russian Orthodox Church. It does not act as an independent autocephalous church and has not proclaimed its own independence. That is why, since invasion, around 900 parishes transferred from the Moscow Patriarchate to the autocephalous Ukrainian Orthodox Church. A particular challenge common to all Ukrainian Christian communities is to be a prophetic voice in this war. However, a domestic reconciliation between the Orthodox Church affiliated with Moscow on the one hand and autocephalous church in other parts of Ukrainian civil society on the other hand should be taking place the sooner the better. Peace-building preparations could relate to the following areas: dealing with collective blaming and dehumanization language, development of reflection on sustainable peace, reconciliation and healing, and keeping ecclesial autonomy from the state. No official dialogue has thus far been established between the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. Yet this is not an obstacle to the informal dialogue on the grassroots level. Active priests and laypersons from both communities are engaged in this inter-Orthodox initiative. The second meeting occurred in February in St. Sophia in Kyiv. Before the meeting, participants prayed together for Ukraine and for the unity of the Ukrainian Orthodoxy. As a result of this meeting, the address to the bishops, clergy, and believers of both churches was published, and I was one of the co-authors of this appeal. We call for a direct dialogue without any preconditions to develop models that would make it possible to unite the Ukrainian Orthodox Church and the Orthodox Church of Ukraine into one local church in the future. For this purpose, we proposed to create a joint working group which would include bishops and theologians of the local Orthodox churches to develop a step-by-step unification plan. We also expect the leadership of the two churches to promulgate a more explicit position in inter-Orthodox dialogue. We hope the unification process will begin soon and take shape this year. We know that resolving the inter-church conflict in Ukraine is only possible with an active mediation of representatives of world Orthodoxy, particularly the Ecumenical Patriarchate, in cooperation with whom an international forum for dialogue should be launched. I do believe Christian churches can play a crucial role in the needed reconciliation process as a path to sustainable and inclusive peace in Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. I think we will have time for questions after the panel. And now it's Julia's turn.
Hello, dear brothers and sisters. My name is Yulia Kominko, and I'd like to share with you 5 reasons why it is necessary to have a dialogue, even when there is no hope to be heard. Reason number 1, you must stop being afraid. I was born in Luhansk. It's a city in the far east of Ukraine, almost on the border with Russia. We spoke principally Russian there, but considered Ukraine as our beloved native country. And I perfectly remember that young people of my generation had no desire to separate from Ukraine, to exist independently or especially to join Russia. As for me, when I was choosing the university after graduating school, I went to Moscow and Kyiv and chose Kyiv. This city became my home from the first sight from the carriage on the famous railway bridge. Therefore, I perceive with great pain and horror the events in 2014, when the so-called Luhansk National Republic and Donetsk National Republic were proclaimed. Most of my relatives rested there. Some of them have already died, and I couldn't even come to their funeral. And just in 2022, when the full-scale war began, I realized that it was precisely the Russian Federation that invaded Ukrainian territories 8 years ago. The tragic events on February the 24th were exactly the same way of occupation as it happened in 2014. Where have you been for 8 years? It was the most popular argument from Russian propaganda. I asked myself the same question and understood that I spent these years in silence and fear. I was afraid and avoided talking about the war because I heard from many people, we don't know the whole truth, it's better to keep silent. So I gave up and waited that the leaders of the countries would resolve this conflict. But they didn't. In February 2022, my family and I left Kyiv for evacuation. We lived in Western Ukraine for 2 months, and I had time to analyze everything. When I returned to Kyiv in April 2022, it was clear for me that I could no longer stay silent. So we started our journalistic project and named it Dialogue Here. Reason number 2, even in war, you aspire to remain human. 3 professional journalists got together. Our main goals were to overcome violence, to return to humanity, to make sense of what is going on and to find God in these sad circumstances. We asked people who have faced aggression about how they were able to cope with it. Under conditions of occupation, bombing, and military actions, how people found the strength to remain human and not become cruel. We prepared interviews with philosophers and psychologists, also with priests, about the ability to accept God's will and follow it. In the first months, the audience of our project reached more than 100,000 people. But now, after a year, I can say that it is very difficult to maintain your humanity during such a long period of full-scale war. Reason number 3. Are you going to protect what you really care about? We didn't expect it, but we were faced with the fact that people wounded by war don't believe in dialogue. The Russians didn't believe our stories about how priests' families with little children went through the occupation of Kyiv in hunger and cold. The people of eastern Ukraine didn't believe that we now understand their feelings. They said, burn in hell, let it be as bad for you as it was for us. People from the west of Ukraine didn't believe that we, natives of eastern Ukraine and members of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, support Ukraine in this war. They said, you are hiding because you are waiting for Putin, go to Russia. Some believers of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church said, "You want to unite us with another confession." Some believers of the Orthodox Church of Ukraine said, you are afraid that your church will be closed, so you pretend that you want a dialogue. But the most difficult thing was ahead. Our Ukrainian Orthodox Church was officially named as the threat of spiritual independence of Ukraine. At the state level, the course for legislative restriction of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church was announced. We had already gained experience and we were ready not to give up. So we have written a petition to the government and over 25,000 people have signed it on the website of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine. We also appealed to the deputies of the Ukrainian Parliament and wrote open letters to President Zelensky in order to convey the danger of religious discrimination of believers. We don't get tired of repeating that we are not the enemies of our motherland. We condemn Russian aggression, we work hard for our country, and we ask not to lay the blame for the actions of individual believers on the whole Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Our church does not deserve a legal ban, and Ukraine, as a democratic state, will only lose by such a decision. We are not fighting for our places of worship or some buildings, but we struggle for our free and beloved Ukraine, where people of different views got on well and lived peacefully. Reason number 4. Will you remain a Christian when your faith is tasted from all sides? I thought so many times, that's it, I've had enough. But the example of our Lord always was by my side. The priest, one of our speakers, said, "The Lord on the cross didn't say to people, 'You all will beg me on your knees.' So we should love other people no matter what they are doing or saying." Our project, our dialogue, is what really helps us to remain Christian in war. Thousands of our readers testify that our articles help them keep their humanity. Reason number 5. Dialogue is an interesting experience. In our project, we've come to some important conclusions. We just can't be silent and must not think that evil will disappear if to pretend it doesn't exist. We have no power to correct all the defects in the world, but if we keep the Lord's covenant and testify to what is going on, we are changing the reality around us. During the year of our project, I have had thousands of opportunities to be convinced of this. I think that dialogues has won. The Lord said to the women after his resurrection, "Go tell the apostles to speak even if you are afraid is what Christians must do. But when you start speaking, you realize that you are not afraid anymore." Thank you.
Thank you, Yulia. And now Ksenia tells us about the role of media in conflict and propaganda.
Hello. I've been asked to talk about the modern media and conflict and propaganda narratives in Russia, which I think is very important as an example of the main challenges that any peace-building effort can encounter in this situation. I would start by saying that the state-controlled media in Russia played a crucial role in preparing this conflict and in fueling it, and in preparing a legitimization for Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. But it's important to realize that anti-Ukrainian sentiments and ideas and narratives did not emerge in 2022 or even 2014. They started long ago after the so-called color revolutions in Georgia and Ukraine, the Orange Revolution in 2004 in Ukraine. After that, the Russian authorities started using the term color revolutions as a synonym for malicious foreign interference in internal affairs. This term was used a lot in news broadcasts, TV shows, books, articles, and it was coupled with promises from Vladimir Putin himself to never allow for color revolutions to happen on Russian soil. This idea of color revolutions also propelled the kind of narrative of Ukraine not as a sovereign state, but as a mere object of manipulation by foreign states that allegedly seek to harm Russia. In 2014, Kremlin reacted to Euromaidan in Ukraine by annexing Crimea and by supporting separatist forces in Donbass and Lugansk. Some Russian media, which at that point started to be more and more subjected to state control and censorship, engaged in a massive propaganda campaign which was aimed at providing explanation and legitimization for the annexation of Crimea, but also for supporting separatists in Donbass and Lugansk. What is very important to remember is that unlike the 2000s, in 2014 we already have the social media channels, a lot of them, and the Russian authorities are very effective in using them. They use all types of social media platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Telegram, and these propaganda messages are often hidden in there, so they are expressed by influencers, bloggers, anonymous accounts. They're inserted into entertainment. Then, since 2014, Ukraine in state-controlled media in Russia was again being depicted as a victim of Western interference in state affairs and as a mere tool to attack Russia. But at the same time, one of the main narratives that became hugely widespread in Russia since 2014 was that somehow neo-Nazis formed the government of Ukraine and commit genocide against ethnic Russians in Ukraine. This is a narrative that is unfortunately very easy to exploit among Russian audiences who see themselves as victors over Nazism and fascism in the Second World War. And this narrative, the way the Russian authorities described it, was one of the main pretexts for starting the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Although Russia was the one that supported separatist groups in the territory of Ukraine and created a situation where Ukrainians had to engage in fighting in their own territories, Russian officials, TV channels, media outlets, and pro-Kremlin celebrities all claimed that it was a deliberate plan of Ukrainian authorities to vanquish the ethnic Russians in Donbass. One of the most famous fakes is when pro-Kremlin media claimed that Ukrainian servicemen crucified a small boy. This was proved to be fake by Russian journalists, by foreign journalists. However, this fake removed widespread in the Russian audiences and also contributed to the idea that Russia somehow has to protect ethnic Russians in Ukraine. Anti-Ukrainian propaganda campaign in Russia and Russian media was coupled with increasingly hostile attitudes towards the West and NATO. And it's also important to understand that this propaganda campaign was not only effective inside Russia, it was also effective outside Russia. And I have to say that I have met people from all over the world, also during my studies in university, who would repeat to me the same narrative that I find in the Russian propaganda. For example, suggesting that NATO would attack Russia if Russia did not attack Ukraine, or talking about the alleged genocide of Russians in Donbass. What is more, I think, relevant for the delegates here is that not only geopolitics is used to justify the war, but also religion is exploited a lot, and not only Christianity, but also Islam. Russian government exploits various heated debates in the Western societies that are relevant to religion, so various social issues such as LGBTQ rights, women's rights, abortions, euthanasia, to present this war as a kind of existential confrontation between Russia, that supposedly upholds Christian values, and the Western civilization that is always depicted as a kind of rotten civilization that let go of its own Christian values. I have to mention at the same time that in Russia, although many people identify as Christian Orthodox, the fact is that religious practice and religious literacy are at very low levels. So it's at least not entirely true to claim that Russia is a fully Christian and Orthodox country. At the same time, Russia sometimes seeks to find popularity among others, more so-called, let's say, left-wing circles in the West and other countries by presenting itself as a fighter against Western colonialism and the hegemony of the US, even though Russia right now is essentially trying to colonize Ukrainian territories. Another way religion is exploited more directly in Russian propaganda is, for example, when Patriarch Kirill encourages Russians to fight on the Russian side in his sermons. One of the examples was when he suggested that by fighting in this war, one can atone for their sins, for their other sins committed in life, or by suggesting that this is a noble thing to do for a Russian Orthodox man to go to war and to fight for their country. Ukraine is also openly depicted in Russian state media and pro-war media as being satanic, as being unholy, while Russia is presented, of course, as being holy and spiritual. And there were also reports in the Russian independent media that Russian authorities also try to promote, to encourage Muslim believers in Russia to fight on its side by spreading out leaflets, by using pro-war imams, by creating videos that make some kind of connection to Islam. This is all quite dark, so I will add a few positive moments. Russian independent media do try to engage in some kind of peace building, first of all by trying to report factual information, secondly by inviting Ukrainian speakers and experts to their live stream and to publish some articles to show and talk about what's going on in Ukraine. I would also say that countries that host right now immigrants, Ukrainian refugees, immigrants from Belarus and Russia, create platforms for not only Russian and Ukrainian and Belarusian journalists, but also just for people from different communities to come together and talk about what's really going on. And finally, two things that I would like to stress as a kind of conclusion. The propaganda narratives are very strong, and they offer very strong messages, and Russian people have been subjected to this propaganda for a very long time. So practically it means that for a just peace and effective reconciliation, it is not enough to simply bring Russians together with Ukrainians. First of all, it's important for those who have been subjected to this kind of propaganda and these lies to realize that this war was unjustified and that it was morally wrong. So I believe that the peace-building mission has to pay attention to truth-finding, even though this can be unpleasant at times, and to use various media platforms to amplify facts rather than to avoid talking about them or suggesting that everyone has their own truth. And secondly, I think for media to be used effectively in the peace-building campaign, it also has to offer a strong, concise message also to Russians. The message cannot be the same for perpetrator and for victim, so I will only say what I hope could be a message for Russians. As a Christian and as a Russian, I would say that taking responsibility for what one has done in Ukraine does not equal destruction of Russia or a lifetime of humiliation. And I think it's entirely Christian to think that accepting responsibility for one's wrongdoing and seeking to atone for it is a sign of real moral strength. Thank you. And I would like to thank Conference of European Churches for being interested in peace initiative for Ukraine and Russia, and I hope that if peace occurs, it will bring justice to Ukraine and a path to forgiveness for Russia. Thank you.
Now Natalia Vasilevich presents us some conception of just peace as an euphemism for a sacred war.
Since the Russian invasion to Ukraine, I was reading almost all speeches, all sermons and all prayers by Patriarch Kirill and other religious leaders. We have organized a project, Christians Against War, in which we also monitor how different narratives, how different argumentation is used for domestic audiences, for political settings, and also in the ecumenical movement. And last year, during the Assembly of the World Council of Churches, a German journalist approached me with a request. I'm confused, said he. Can you probably explain me the following? I wanted to ask people of the delegation of the Russian Orthodox Church if they agree on theological argumentation and support of the Russian aggression against Ukraine by their patriarch. But all of them denied that patriarch ever did support the war. Patriarch Kirill himself also openly denies that he supported the war in Ukraine. After the assembly, its acting general secretary, Father Yon Sauka, paid a visit to Moscow. According to the official communique about this visit, published by the Russian Orthodox Church, Father Sauka has addressed Patriarch Kirill, I quote, theological argumentation and support of the war, which, for some people, were made public in some of your sermons and speeches. Patriarch Kirill was surprised. At the same communique describes further, Patriarch Kirill seemed not to be aware what we are speaking about, and therefore the members of the Russian delegation explained that some people just quote certain phrases from Patriarch Kirill homilies, failing to give full quotations from his speeches and put them in context, and thus using them to engineer accusations against the primate of the Russian Orthodox Church. Indeed, speaking with the ecumenical audience, Patriarch Kirill avoids to support the war and say, I'm supporting this war, I support aggression, I support military operation in Ukraine. For example, discussing the war in Ukraine with Justin Welby, Archbishop of Canterbury, on 16 March 2022, I quote from the communique, the parties stressed the need to achieve a lasting peace based on justice as soon as possible. In the talk with Pope Francis on the same day, I also quote the communique, the parties stressed the importance of the ongoing negotiation process, expressing their hope for the soonest achievement of a just peace. During the recent visit of WCC delegation in May 2023, Patriarch Kirill stressed, I am deeply convinced that as religious people, we are called upon to contribute to the strengthening of peace and not to take the side of political confrontation. Also speaking once in Kremlin in October 2022, Patriarch Kirill said, many think I'm a pacifist. So that's how he probably perceives how people understand what he's saying. And in the same talk in Kremlin, he said, I'm not pacifist because I'm not only for peace, I am for just peace. That's why I cannot be considered fully a pacifist. And the just peace can be achieved only when the justice is achieved. So in a certain sense, peace is not enough. We need justice. In our religious tradition, as he said, there is no peace without justice, said he. So if we see this argumentation, these expressions, we can understand that the very concept just peace is opposed to peace. The just, the very reference to justice is something which is not enforcing peace, but something which denies peace. Back then in Karlsruhe, I responded to the confused German journalist that I am puzzled not less than he. Sometimes when I hear Patriarch Kirill speaking in clear support of the war, I even start to doubt in my ability to understand the Russian language. on 11, we can understand also from other activities, not only from the words, but from deeds. On 11th of May this year, a priest, Ioan Koval from Moscow, was defrocked. Father Koval's offense was to refuse praying for the victory of the Russian army in Ukraine in the prayer composed by Patriarch Kirill himself. Father Ioan chose to pray for peace instead of victory, and was severely punished by his own church. It also becomes clear when we see whom Patriarch Kirill points as enemies. In all prayers and all sermons and all speeches, there is no support of war, but always there is talk about enemies. For example, in prayer for the restoration of peace on 3rd March 2022, when the full-scale war just started, Patriarch Kirill, as enemies, described foreign tribes desiring to be at war and fight against Holy Rus. On the next day, on 6th of March, he became more specific who those foreign tribes were. Those who claim world power, and those who demand to hold a gay pride, which is a test of loyalty to that very powerful world. In sermon on 6 December 2022, he spoke about Western enemies in the following way. Those who came from the West did not need our toll, they need our souls, our minds, our political will. They are a dangerous force that could radically affect the spiritual life of the people. According to Patriarch Kirill, there is a need to defend not only political sovereignty, but also our spiritual sovereignty, our faith, our tradition, the spiritual foundation of our personal and social life. The idea of liberation war, it's not something which was invented by Patriarch Kirill. It is enshrined in the official document of the Russian Orthodox Church, basis of its social concept. Maybe you hear this for the first time, because if you open the social concept of the Russian Orthodox Church in the chapter dedicated to war and peace, you don't find this expression, because it's hidden in the chapter number 2, Church and Nation. In this chapter, it stated, in all times the Church has called upon her children to love their homeland on earth and not to spare their lives to protect it if it was threatened. The Russian Church on many occasions gave her blessing to the people for them to take part in liberation wars. Moreover, if you avoid dying for the honor and freedom of the fatherland, you will die a criminal or a slave. Die for the faith, it's a motivation slogan, die for the faith and the fatherland, and you will be granted life and crown in heaven. So, you know, this idea, it was not that all soldiers who now die in Ukraine fighting, that they all go to heaven. It's not invention of Patriarch Kirill. We could find it 23 years ago in a main document of the Russian Orthodox Church, which is the social doctrine of the Russian Orthodox Church. And I remember then when this document was adopted in 2000, everyone was very happy that the Russian Church finally did produce some document to reflect on the modern world and ecumenical. We had so many ecumenical conferences on this document, and I don't know how. Myself, I wrote my master thesis about this document, and only in 2023 I noticed that this document really promotes the war, and because under the understanding of the war as liberation war, you can find the argumentation which sees that only then just peace will be restored in Ukraine when Russia will have victory and when the spiritual security will be defended and guaranteed. So that's very often then, as I showed you, when Patriarch Kirill, when he speaks to the ecumenical audience, when he speaks meeting different delegations, it's very difficult to make a dialogue about his theological argumentation because he denies something which he says. And I think that will be very creative role of theologians to find, I think Ksenia was saying that it's very interesting that the war is framed in a way that it's very discourse of liberation, discourse of even liberation theology against hegemony of the West, also discourse of anti-colonialism, which perceives Russia as a country which is defending itself, its own identity from colonial power of the West, of the US. So when we try to engage in dialogue and discuss and say to Patriarch Kirill, it's not okay to support the war, he always say, no, I don't support the war. So when we say you support imperialism, Russian imperialism, he say, no, I'm anti-imperialistic. So all the theological argumentation is turned over. And when we try to engage in these discussions, we first of all, we should not use traditional ways against imperialism, against colonialism, but we should turn the agenda and we need to reconsider the idea of just peace and how it is misused in the theological language, because the both words are misused. The word just is used to deny peace, and the word peace is very often used to deny the just right of Ukrainian people for self-defense. So very often in pacifism also is misused to deny this self-defense right, which cannot be denied, which is not fair to deny, it is not just to deny. So my suggestion would be that we work not only with theological argumentations, but also with theological manipulations, and it's a creative work for next 4 or 5 years in the pathways of peace. We will develop a new strategy to avoid these manipulations and to find a way to engage in dialogue, in a meaningful dialogue. Thank you very much.
Well, I thank all the speakers, and now I invite you to watch a short video. It's a sort of piece of art, a very emotional one, and the authors, it's a cartoon, and the authors remain anonymous because they still are in a country where it could be dangerous to produce such cartoons and under their proper names. So let's watch. Well, frankly speaking, I still don't believe that all these things are happening right now in the 21st century in the middle of Europe. Well, now I have some questions to our guests from different Ukrainian and Belarusian church organizations. How do you envision the future of Ukraine? What are your hopes for peace in the country and the broader region, maybe? Alexandra.
Yes, thank you. Being a Ukrainian, of course, we just envision our victory and we don't have any other options. But we must also remember that this victory, it comes with a price which is very high. Because many young people, men and women who are sometimes a few years younger even than me, they're dying on the front lines, which gives us the opportunity to be present here today. So some of my friends, friends of my friends, young women, they're planning the funerals instead of their weddings, of their housewarming parties. They first buy armor to their men and then they buy coffins instead of buying the baby clothes. So there are many wounds which will take a long time to heal and will also present churches with many challenges. So for example, just in the month of May, Kiev had more than 20 attacks. For the 1 month, we had 21 attacks on the city, and that's the reality the Ukrainian youth is now living in, and I think it's very important to remember that the war is not over, and unfortunately, I think it's far from being over.
I would like to start with the future, my ideal future of Europe. I believe that the future of Ukraine goes hand in hand with the future of Europe and vice versa. So, first of all, our Europe should be liberated and cleansed of imperialism, revanchism, totalitarianism, and it will influence the future, the bright future of many nations and countries in our continent. And if you talk about the future of Ukraine specifically, I'm strongly convinced that the future for Ukraine, it means our security. Our security is our future. And now it's the question how to achieve it. First of all, it's our liberation. All territories, all occupied territories must be liberated. And secondly, Ukraine must integrate into NATO and the European Union. And I cannot say that it's only the future of Ukraine, it's, as I said before, the peaceful future for all European nations. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we don't see signs of the end of the war at this point in time. So our first priority as the Ukrainians is to survive. The key to stopping the war is in the hands of Russian authorities. The reason why I say this is if Ukraine stops fighting at its part, this will lead to the killing of many people, many civilian people. We already seen this in Bucha, in Izium, in Mariupol, in Irpin and in other Ukrainian cities. You may not see much information about Ukraine in the news, but in reality, there is no corner of my country that is completely safe. Russian troops are firing missiles and drones at hospitals, residential buildings, schools, markets, orphanages, bus stops, train stations, and many other public places where are civilians. We recently also witnessed an environmental disaster committed by Russians. They blew up the Kakhovka Dam, destroying lives of many civilian people and animals. People who call for an end to hostilities at any cost are actually just indulging the aggressor. To stop hostilities at any cost is at the cost of killed people, at the cost of unjustly seized territories, at the cost of kidnapped children, at the cost of destroyed infrastructure, at the cost of violence and war crimes, at the cost of terrorism against civilian people. And I think it's unacceptable to stop fighting at this stage, because such a decision will strengthen the aggressor to achieving his predatory imperial goals. Thank you. In my point of view, the future of Ukraine lies in the restoration of the legal borders of 1991, in compensation for the damage caused, in the creation for the demilitarized zone on the border territories of the Russian Federation. But the path to achieving such a future will begin when Russia stops invasion and hostilities on its part and leave the occupied territories. Thank you.
First of all, I find it difficult to speak about the future of a country of which I am not a citizen, but I need to say some words. If we carefully look at the Gospel, it speaks very little about the destinies of nations, and it focuses on each individual person and their choices. I just want to say, I just want to remind, first of all for me and for everyone, that even if we win and in this war, and if we drive out the Russian army from Ukraine and from Belarus too, we can still lose. Because the main battle of every Christian is the battle within ourselves. And I want to remind that the main task of Christian is not to defeat all enemies, not to become the stronger, but the most important thing a Christian can and should we do is to remain a Christian even in the face of war and the death.
And how, well, it's a little bit maybe a question for the future. How can, if they can, young Christians contribute to encouraging communities to talk and repair relationships?
First of all, I think, I believe that it is very important to lead with personal example and personal contacts. Unfortunately, we have also divisions inside Ukraine, within Ukrainian churches. So patience is respect are crucial in this process. And there is also a very beautiful phrase which was said in the 19th century but by Metropolitan of Kiev, Platon Horodetsky, that our walls, they don't reach the sky, the walls that we build between ourselves. So I hope that the same way as today in the morning we all went to different services but then gathered all together in this room to be here, I hope that in the very same way our faith and the love of Christ will help us to restore the unity between Ukrainian churches and the Ukrainian Orthodoxy.
The schism in the Ukrainian Orthodoxy is, frankly speaking, extremely deep and bleeding. And the fact is that many people who are not originally from Ukraine cannot fully comprehend it. Ukrainian Orthodoxy is one of the largest in the world, and that's why this schism is absolutely catastrophic. But Ksenia said that maybe this task to contribute, to encourage communities, it's a task for future. I would say that talking of young people, it's something that we should do right now. And one huge advantage that we have, like young people, young generation, is that we were not really involved in in the political paradigms that caused this schism, this split. We grew up in independent Ukraine. We share the same values, principles. We love God. We love our motherland, Ukraine. Meaning there is no barrier to communicating, to do something. And it's the most important thing, to do something at least at the grassroots level where we are. And I'm sure that this task is for now. Speaking of our authorities, it's much harder to estimate how fast and how successfully their dialogue can be. I have no idea, frankly speaking. But I'm sure that young generation of Ukrainians are able to carry out the dialogue at our level.
In my own experience and the experience of my close people, any attempts to reach fellow believers from Russia ran into a blank wall. It's very difficult, influence people who are just under the iron cup of their authority, who are afraid to oppose the war, who are afraid to stand with people of Ukraine. And in my opinion, the only opportunity we have at the moment is to pray about defeat of Russia and to pray for the admonition of Russian Christians and for their repentance. Thank you.
I don't think that the actions of young Christians should be different from what Christians in general do. There are many ways to bring peace closer, and for example, some of us become volunteers. Some work in the media, and some maybe defend their country in the front lines. But the common factor that makes us Christian is the same: is the Lord, and His word and the gospel. And as soon as we forget about this, we immediately cease to be Christians. And when we remember God, we make this world a better place.
And what role can churches play in preparing a peace processes? How can churches address the underlying causes of war and maybe help people to resolve the conflict, some kind peacefully?
First of all, I'd like to stress that forgiveness is only possible when there is repentance, the acceptance of one's guilt, and then taking the responsibility for one's own deeds on the other side. So justice comes with the reconciliation, and I would say that it comes before the reconciliation. These two things cannot be one without another. But also it's a very long and painful process. So of course we pray for the wounds to heal, but we should also recognize that it may take a long time, many years, and maybe even generations for the forgiveness and reconciliation to be present on our lands. Even Christ himself, after his resurrection, his wounds stayed with him, so he was not resurrected without the signs of all the torture he went through, but he resurrected in his body, was shown the signs of what he has been through. And I think for the churches there is a saying, cry with those who cry and rejoice with those who rejoice. At the moment, unfortunately, the churches are the ones staying with those who suffer and who cry.
This question is super hard actually to answer. But I would like to start with the fact that our biggest mistake was that after the Second World War, we were sure that it would never happen again. And unfortunately, the form of peacemaking we used to believe in, that we used to practice, hasn't prevented the war in Ukraine. And the question is why? One of the most important challenges nowadays for the ecumenical movement, for European churches as well as for European society as a whole, is to reconsider the ideas of peace building and to understand what peace building is nowadays and how we can practice it. And peaceful dialogues or compromise that Ukraine and Russia have been called for are super cool, powerful peacemaking tools. But the problem is that they are not always efficient. I'm personally convinced that the root cause of the war in Ukraine is ideology, namely the Russian ideology. Imperialism, revanchism, totalitarianism, and we can combine all these ideologies in one. Russian world, it's called like that, Ruski Mir. And as Natalia mentioned that, yeah, it's very hard now to define it because Patriarch Kirill can say that I'm pro-life, I stand for peace, and so on and so on. And I think it's a challenge. It's another challenge for us. We should research it. We should understand this conception in order to be able to condemn it. And yeah, and unfortunately, the mistake that was done before the Second World War happened again. Yeah, and because everything before the February 24th, yeah, everything looked like the world wanted to pacify Russia, and it's not good. And I like one quote by a famous Protestant theologian, Reinhold Niebuhr. He said that sentimental illusions lead to surrender to tyranny, and we should avoid it. Peacemaking after Bucha, Mariupol, Kherson should be different. We cannot say that we shouldn't be peacemakers. It's what we are supposed to do as Christians, but it should be different. And in my opinion, one of the most important principles in this peacemaking, one of the most important foundations, should be condemnation of policies that can lead to war, expansionist ideologies or imperialist ideologies. And it's very important to see it before the war happens. And speaking of how the churches can influence it, how can the churches play in preparing a peace process, I strongly believe that there was only one church that could have done it really successfully. It was the Russian Orthodox Church, but unfortunately it hadn't happened, and maybe it will not happen. And nowadays we should just realize that there is only one way to finish this hell. It's liberation of Ukraine. And as soon as Russia withdraws its troops from Ukraine, the war will finish. That's as simple as that, and I believe that the church leaders and European churches and the ecumenical movement should stand for this action and support Ukraine in this regard. And it should be a universal tool how to act in such situations, at least in Europe. Yeah, all national territories, that should be sacred. Nobody is allowed to violate them. And doesn't matter who the aggressor is and where the war is. Thank you.
It is important for me that Bogdan told us about that this war is not about territorial disputes or geopolitical interests. In the heart of Russia's war against Ukraine lies the neo-imperialist ideology of the Russian peace, or as it calls, Ruski Mir. This ideology is about that all countries and territories that were ever part of the Russian Empire should be returned to the influence of Russian Empire or to its composition. And there are many methods that used to achieve this goal, like cultural expansion, economic influence, gaze war, and aggressive military invasions, as we see in Ukraine. I think in such a situation, the role of the Church lies in raising a prophetic voice against the ideology of Russian peace, which denies the right of existence to other people, languages, cultures. The Church can and should point out the inhuman nature of this ideology, as well as expose the pseudo-Christian language of conservative values that used by Russian ideologists to attract their followers. And I think that Russian Christians could start the path to reconciliation with such a step of condemning the ideology of Russian peace. Thank you.
I want to remind how the history of Christianity began. It started with martyrs, and martyr is a Greek word, and it means witness. And in general, our great history began when we became witnesses. And I believe that this approach should not be changed, and if each of us honestly and directly will speak about this war, about the pain, about Russian world, Ruski Mir, and about the victims of this ideology, it will be a significant contribution to the cause of peace and Christian preaching. Thank you.
Well, thank you. From my part, I'd like to confirm what Alice and Bogdan have said, that until Putin's regime is in power, until Russia is in its current state is strong, and it is still strong despite all the economic measures, all the sanctions, unfortunately, until the parts of Ukraine are occupied, there will no be peace for Ukraine, no freedom for Belarus and Russia, and the whole world will be insecure, and no safety in Europe nor in the whole world. So that's obvious for all of us, I think. And I think that church should be, well, at least a witness of all these crimes. At least it should call things by their names. And it's very important what Ksenia and Natalia have said, that until the Russian church continues to say that war is peace, peace is war, and continues to falsificate all the narratives, this will last for years, unfortunately. Well, I don't see any good future in the next months or even years. Well, so do we have time for questions? No. So we will continue this evening with the project Pathways to Peace Initiatives of the Conference of European Churches. And this project will develop all these topics related with Ukraine, the situation in the Eastern Europe in the next years. Well, thank you very, very much for all of us, all of you. And we have...
Please, may I have your attention on behalf of the Nominations Committee? The General Assembly Board has now been published online. It was 13 minutes late being put online because of a technical problem with uploading the document, but our voting doesn't take we won't be voting on it until 16:30 tomorrow, so it will have the 24 hours that is required for you to have a look and to feed back. Sorry for interrupting you, but that had to be said on the floor of the session. Thank you very much.